"Can I have the leftovers?" the 4-year-old waif asked the Millionaire restaurant owner as he was throwing out the scraps. But what happened next was unbelievable. Comment and rate my story from 0 to 10. Your opinion is very important. And subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The smell of wasted food mingled with the aroma of the refined dishes that still escaped through the windows of the busiest restaurant in the great cosmopolitan metropolis. It was almost midnight when the last customer left the establishment, and the staff began discarding the day's leftovers into large plastic bags behind the elegant building. Hidden in the shadows of the dumpsters, a small figure watched every movement with wide, hungry eyes. The 4-year-old waif, so fragile she looked barely 2, patiently waited for everyone to leave. Her tangled hair fell over her dirty face, and her tattered clothes barely covered her skeletal body, which shivered from the cold night air. 3 weeks ago, she had discovered this place by chance, following the irresistible scent that came from the kitchens. Since then, she had returned every night, waiting for the right moment to scavenge the remains that were thrown away. It was her only meal of the day, if she could find something still edible among the wreckage. Across the street, the 30-year-old millionaire checked the day's numbers on his tablet, pleased with the profits that his chain of upscale restaurants had generated. His investments in Wall Street stocks had proven to be correct, and his fortune was constantly growing. With his leading man looks and imposing stature, he commanded a culinary empire that catered to the city's elite, accumulating wealth through sophisticated dishes and prices that few could afford. That night, something different happened. As he walked to his imported car, the successful businessman heard a soft noise coming from the back of the building. Curious, he approached cautiously and saw the small figure rummaging through the garbage bags, trying to reach something that had fallen to the bottom of a dumpster. The girl was so focused on her desperate search for food that she didn't notice his presence. When she finally managed to grab a piece of bread that still looked usable, she turned around and came face to face with the tall man who was watching her in silence. Her eyes widened with fear, and she shrank against the cold wall, expecting to be chased away as always happened when she was discovered. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said in a soft voice, crouching down to her height. "Are you hungry?" The child nodded shyly, clutching the piece of bread to her chest as if it were her greatest treasure. Her small hands trembled, not only from the cold, but from a deep fear that she had carried for as long as she could remember. "What's your name?" the millionaire asked, noticing for the first time the details of the misery before him. The bare and bruised feet, the dirty nails, the extreme thinness that made her bones protrude under her pale skin. "I don't have a name," she murmured, lowering her eyes. "People call me different things." That simple answer touched something deep in the businessman's heart. He himself had grown up without a family, raised in foster homes, until he managed to build his wealth through hard work and determination. He recognized in the girl the same loneliness that had accompanied him throughout his childhood. "Do you live around here?" he insisted, trying to better understand the child's situation. "In the Fleabag Motel, across town," she replied, pointing in a vague direction, "with other boys and girls who have nowhere to go." The millionaire felt a pang in his chest. His calculated generosity and obsessive perfectionism had always kept him distant from situations like this, but something in the child's fragility broke down his usual defenses. There was a purity in her eyes that contrasted violently with the harshness of the world she knew. "Would you like to work for me?" he asked impulsively, surprising himself with his own words. "You could help in the kitchen, clean some dishes, organize simple things. In return, you would eat 3 meals a day and earn some pocket change." The girl's eyes lit up for the first time since he had seen her. It was as if a small flame of hope had been lit in the darkness of her existence. She nodded vigorously, still not completely believing that this could be real. "Then come here tomorrow morning, very early," he said, standing up. "We'll see how you do." As he walked back to his car, the businessman struggled with conflicting feelings. His rational side questioned the impulsive decision to hire a street child, while something deeper in his soul whispered that this encounter had not been a coincidence. His fears of emotional commitment, which had haunted him since the loss of his own family in childhood, began to manifest again. The girl remained standing in the same spot for several minutes after he left, holding the piece of bread and trying to process what had just happened. For the first time in a long time, she had something beyond mere survival to look forward to the next day. When she finally managed to return to the motel, she found the cruel landlady waiting for her at the door with a furious expression. The middle-aged woman, with scars on her face and small, cruel eyes, blocked her entrance with her thick arm. "Where have you been until this hour?" she growled, grabbing the girl's arm with excessive force. "I thought you had run away again." "I was looking for food," the child replied, trying to break free from the painful grip. "Food?" The woman laughed bitterly. "You eat when I let you, understand? And now you're going to go without dinner for leaving without permission." The girl was pushed into the crowded room where she slept with 5 other children in squalid conditions. But that night, for the first time in months, she fell asleep with a smile on her face, dreaming of the possibility of a different life that had unexpectedly arisen among the dumpsters of an elegant restaurant. The sun had not yet fully risen when the girl arrived at the restaurant, her bare feet making noise against the cold asphalt. She had woken up at 5 in the morning, silently escaping the motel before the cruel landlady could stop her or find out about her new opportunity. The millionaire was already there, checking the preparations for another busy day. Seeing her standing timidly at the back entrance, he felt again that pang in his chest that he couldn't explain. The morning light revealed even more starkly the child's deplorable state, but it also showed a surprising determination in her large eyes. "You came," he said, trying to hide the emotion in his voice. "I thought maybe you had changed your mind." "I always keep my promises," she replied with an impressive seriousness for her age. "My mother taught me that before she passed." During the first few weeks, the girl proved to be a tireless worker. Her small hands washed dishes with meticulous care, organized utensils, and swept every corner of the kitchen with a dedication that impressed even the most experienced employees. The businessman watched her progress with a mixture of pride and growing concern. She ate each meal as if it were her last, savoring every bite with a gratitude that deeply touched everyone around her. The cooks began to prepare extra portions just to see her smile, and even the gruffest waiters melted when she thanked them with her sweet voice. The millionaire discovered that he enjoyed talking to her during breaks. The child had a unique perspective on life, a premature wisdom born of suffering that made him question many of his own priorities. When she talked about her simple dreams, having a bed of her own, shoes that didn't hurt, being able to take a hot bath every day, he felt a strange pain in his chest. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked one day while drying dishes next to him. The question caught him off guard. He stopped counting the money from the register and looked at the girl, trying to find an answer that made sense. "Maybe because you remind me that there are more important things than profit and dividends," he said finally. His businesses continued to prosper. Investments in Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies were yielding good returns, and his application in international funds guaranteed a stable income. But for the first time in years, the businessman found himself thinking less about the numbers and more about the way the girl smiled when she received her small salary at the end of each week. However, the situation at the motel was deteriorating rapidly. The cruel landlady had discovered that the child was earning money and began to demand all her income as payment for care. When the girl tried to hide some coins to buy shoes, she was severely punished and forced to sleep in the damp basement for 3 nights. "You look thinner today," the millionaire observed on a Thursday morning, noticing the deeper dark circles under the child's eyes. "I'm fine," she lied, trying to hide the purple marks on her arms where the landlady had squeezed her with excessive force the night before. But he wasn't a fool. During his years of building his wealth from scratch, he had learned to read people, and he knew when someone was suffering. The girl was quieter, more frightened, and there was a new sadness in her movements that deeply worried him. "If someone is hurting you, you can tell me," he said softly, crouching down to her height. "I won't let anyone hurt you." The child looked at him with tears in her eyes, desperately wanting to trust him, but knowing that the consequences could be even worse if the landlady found out. "She said that if I told anyone, she would sell me to bad people," she whispered, her voice trembling with fear. Those words hit the businessman like a punch to the stomach. His rational mind, trained to solve complex business problems, began to work furiously, seeking solutions to protect the girl without putting her in more danger. That night, he stayed at the restaurant until very late, unable to focus on the financial reports. His fears of emotional commitment fought against a growing sense of responsibility that he couldn't ignore. The child had awakened in him something he thought he had lost forever: the ability to truly care about another person. During the weekend, things got drastically worse. The girl didn't show up on Saturday nor on Sunday. The millionaire became increasingly restless, pacing the empty restaurant like a caged lion. He called several contacts, trying to find information about the motel, but his initial searches revealed only vague addresses and confusing records. On Monday morning, when she finally appeared, the businessman almost didn't recognize her. The child was even more fragile, with a cut on her lip and a purple mark on her cheek that she was trying to hide with her hair. Her hands trembled constantly, and she jumped at every sudden noise. "What did they do to you?" he asked, his voice filled with a fury that surprised them both. "I broke a glass," she lied, lowering her eyes. It was an accident, but he knew it was beyond small household accidents. There was something systematic about the child's suffering, something calculated and cruel that made his blood boil. His own childhood traumas, carefully buried under layers of success and money, began to resurface with renewed force. As he watched the girl work that day, he noticed other disturbing details. She ate very little at lunch, pushing the food around her plate as if she were nauseous. When a waiter dropped a tray, she threw herself on the floor and cowered as if expecting to be hit. "I can't pretend I'm not seeing this anymore," he muttered to himself, watching her through the window of his makeshift office in the back of the restaurant. That afternoon, he made a decision that would change everything. He used his contacts in human resources to discreetly investigate the motel where the girl lived. What he discovered made him nauseous. Records of several filed complaints, children who had disappeared from the records, and a protection network that seemed carefully constructed to prevent deeper investigations. When the girl was preparing to leave at the end of the day, he called her aside. "I want you to know something," he said, placing his hand gently on her small shoulder. "No matter what happens, you'll always have a place here. Always." She looked at him with large, wet eyes, wanting to believe but fearing to allow herself to have hope. "What if they don't let me come any more?" "Then I'll come get you," he replied, with a determination that surprised him. "No one will stop you from having a better life." As he watched her walk away through the dark streets, the millionaire knew that he had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. His carefully controlled life, focused only on multiplying his fortune and expanding his business, had been completely transformed by a 4-year-old child who had appeared among his dumpsters. And he was willing to use all his capital, all his influence, to protect her from whatever was slowly destroying her. 3 months had passed since the millionaire decided to investigate the girl's situation, and what he had discovered kept him awake every night. Through discreet contacts and private investigations paid for with part of his dividends, he had mapped a network of exploitation that went far beyond a simple, poorly run motel. The cruel landlady did not work alone. There were at least 6 commercial establishments in the area that used children in illegal conditions, all supplied through a coordinated scheme that promised decent work but delivered only suffering. Small restaurants, auto repair shops, and even some clothing stores participated in this systematic exploitation. The businessman had hired a private investigator, spending a considerable amount of his net worth to gather concrete evidence. The reports arrived weekly, each revealing new layers of cruelty that made his stomach churn. Children aged 5 to 12 working 16 hours a day, beaten when they didn't meet impossible quotas, fed only scraps, and kept in deplorable conditions. The waif continued to show up at the restaurant every day, but she was visibly deteriorating. Her small hands developed premature calluses, and she often dozed off on her feet while working. When asked about the new marks that regularly appeared on her arms and legs, she always made up creative excuses about falls and accidents. "She hits me when I talk about you," the child confessed one rainy afternoon, while helping to organize the spices in the kitchen. "She says you'll get tired of me and send me away, like everyone does." The millionaire felt a growing anger burning in his chest. His fears of emotional commitment had been completely overcome by a protective instinct he didn't know he possessed. The waif had become the center of his life in a way he never thought possible, and seeing her suffer was destroying his inner peace. "That's never going to happen," he said firmly, crouching down to look her in the eyes. "You're part of my life now, and no one is going to change that." But his determination would be tested in an unexpected way. The following week, the waif arrived at work with an arm wrapped in a makeshift bandage and a black eye that she could barely open. She tried to hide the injuries, but it was impossible to disguise the extent of the wounds. "What happened this time?" he asked, his voice trembling with contained fury. "I fell down the stairs," she murmured, but her voice was so weak that it could barely be heard. It was the last straw. The businessman cancelled all his appointments for the day and decided it was time to directly confront the owner of the Fleabag Motel. He used one of his more modest cars so as not to attract attention and drove to the address that his investigators had confirmed. The place was even worse than he had imagined. A dilapidated 3-story building with broken windows and rusty external staircases. The smell of mold and human waste was noticeable even from the outside. Dirty children played in the dirt yard, all visibly malnourished and wearing tattered clothes. The cruel landlady greeted him suspiciously at the door. She was a robust woman of about 50, with scars on her face and small eyes that gleamed with malice. When he identified himself as the waif's employer, her expression changed to a mixture of greed and caution. "Oh, so you're the one filling the brat's head with ideas," she said, blocking the entrance. "She's been talking a lot about decent work and that nonsense. I want to talk about the conditions in which she lives here," the millionaire replied, trying to maintain his composure. "I have some concerns." The woman laughed bitterly. "Concerns? She eats, she has a place to sleep, and she still makes money working for you. What more could an orphaned pest want?" During the tense conversation that followed, the businessman discovered details that horrified him. The landlady not only exploited the children in her care, but she lent them to other establishments for a fee. There was an organized system of rotation, where the stronger children worked in heavier places, while the more fragile ones were assigned to tasks that required delicacy and patience. "Your little girl has been giving me a lot of trouble lately," the woman continued, lighting a cheap cigarette. "She keeps questioning orders, talking about rights. Maybe it's time to send her to a place where they learn to obey better." "What exactly does that mean?" he asked, feeling a chill run down his spine. "I know people who know how to educate rebellious children. Places where they learn to value what they have here." The threat was clear, and the millionaire realized that he was dealing with something much more sinister than he had imagined. This was not just a cruel woman exploiting vulnerable children. It was part of a larger operation, with connections that extended to even darker places. That night, he met with his private investigator in a discreet cafe downtown. The man, an experienced ex-cop, had news that would confirm his worst fears. "I managed to track at least 3 cases of children who disappeared from the motel records in the last year," the investigator reported, pushing a folder across the table. "Officially, they were transferred to foster families in other states. But I couldn't find any documents to prove that." The businessman opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were photos, documents, and accounts that painted a terrifying picture of a system that had been operating for years without interference from the authorities. His fortune, built through hard work and smart investments, seemed insignificant in the face of the magnitude of the problem he had discovered. "There's something else," the investigator continued. "Some of the children I managed to track were sold to wealthy families in other states. There seems to be a demand for small, docile children among people who don't want to go through the legal adoption processes." The revelation hit the millionaire like a bolt of lightning. During all these months protecting and growing fond of the waif, he hadn't even considered the possibility that she might have biological family still alive. The idea that there might be a sister, a brother, or even distant relatives who were separated from her devastated him. "I need you to investigate the waif's history," he said urgently. "Find out where she came from, if she has family, anything that can help us better understand her situation." The next day, when the child arrived for work, she seemed even more fragile than usual. There was a new sadness in her eyes, as if something fundamental had changed overnight. She worked in silence all morning, avoiding eye contact and whispering monosyllabic answers when questioned. "The woman at the motel said that maybe I can't come to work here anymore," she confessed finally during lunch, the tears rolling silently down her thin face. "She said she found people who need girls like me for special jobs." The millionaire felt his world collapse. All his money, all his influence, all his determination to protect her seemed inadequate in the face of the cruel reality they faced. But looking at that child who had transformed his life, he knew that he would fight to the last penny of his wealth to keep her safe. "That's not going to happen," he said, with a conviction that surprised them both. "No matter what I have to do, you're going to stay here with me." But as he spoke those words, a devastating discovery was about to shake everything he thought he knew about the waif and his own ability to protect her from the cruel world that surrounded her. The report arrived on a rainy Tuesday, delivered discreetly by the private investigator at the restaurant office. The millionaire opened the envelope with trembling hands, without imagining that the following pages would destroy everything he thought he knew about the girl who had become the center of his life. The child was not alone in the world. There was a twin sister. The words danced before his eyes as he read the devastating details. 4 years ago, 2 identical girls had been separated after the death of their parents in an accident. One went to the Fleabag Motel where he had met his little protégé, and the other had been sold to a wealthy family in a city 1,000 miles away. "How is this possible?" he murmured, letting the papers fall on the table. "How did no one ever mention a sister?" The investigator, an experienced man who had seen much human suffering, seemed genuinely shaken by the details he had uncovered. The separation was intentional. They kept different documents, falsified records. They wanted to make sure they never met again. The family that bought the other girl was influential and rich, owners of several companies in the textile sector. Officially, they had adopted the child through legal channels, but the investigator had discovered suspicious payments that suggested a commercial transaction disguised as a humanitarian adoption process. The businessman felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath his feet. During all these months, while he grew increasingly fond of the waif, fighting to protect her and providing her with a better life, there was another identical child living a completely different reality. A sister who probably didn't even know of her existence. "Where is she now?" he asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "That's where the situation gets more complicated," the investigator replied, hesitating. "The girl developed some health problems. Apparently, she never fully adapted to the separation. She has episodes of severe anxiety, constant nightmares, and refuses to talk about her past." The millionaire closed his eyes, imagining the suffering of two children who should be together, growing up as sisters, sharing their pains and joys. Instead, one lived in utter misery while the other was raised in luxury, but both carrying deep traumas from the forced separation. That afternoon, when the waif arrived for work, he watched her with new eyes. He looked for signs of nostalgia, moments when she seemed to be thinking about something distant, any indication that she missed someone important, and he found them in abundance. There were times when she would stop in the middle of a task and stare into space, as if she were listening to a voice that only she could perceive. Sometimes she would prepare 2 plates during lunch, as if she were expecting someone to share the meal, and then become confused about why she had done that. "Have you ever had siblings?" he asked carefully, while she organized the utensils in the kitchen. The child stopped immediately, her eyes filling with tears. "I dream about a girl just like me," she whispered. "We play together, sleep in the same bed, sing the same songs. But when I wake up, she's never there." The businessman's heart broke. The waif knew, on some deep and instinctive level, that she was incomplete, that she had lost an essential part of herself that she couldn't even name or fully understand. "What would you do if you found out that this girl from your dreams is real?" he asked, crouching down to her height. "I would run to the end of the world to find her," she replied without hesitation, her eyes shining with a fierce determination. "And I would never let anyone separate us again." That night, the millionaire made the most important decision of his life. No matter how much it would cost, no matter how many obstacles he would encounter along the way, he would reunite the 2 sisters. He would use all his fortune, sell his restaurants if necessary, but he would give back to the waif the family that had been cruelly stolen from her. The first obstacle came in the form of his own human resources manager. During a routine meeting about the restaurant employees, she made comments that put him on alert. "Don't you think you're getting too attached to that child?" she asked, flipping through some papers with feigned casualness. "People are starting to comment on the special privileges she receives." "What kind of comments?" he questioned, a suspicion beginning to form in his mind. "Oh, nothing much. Just observations about how you spend a lot of time talking to her, how she eats better than some adult employees. You know how people like to talk." Something in the woman's tone bothered him deeply. During the following days, he began to pay more attention to his manager's patterns. She asked subtle questions about the waif, showed excessive interest in her work hours, and was always around when they talked. The confirmation of his suspicions came through an intercepted phone call by chance. He had forgotten some documents in his office and returned to the restaurant after hours, when he heard the familiar voice of the manager talking on the phone. "Yes, she's still working here," the woman was saying. "The boss is very attached. It will be difficult to convince him to let her go, but I have some ideas to solve this." The millionaire felt his blood run cold. His own employee, someone he had trusted for 3 years, was working against him. Even worse, she was working against the waif he was trying so hard to protect. In the following days, he discovered the extent of the betrayal. The manager had been infiltrated into the company specifically to monitor his activities and report any interference in the child exploitation scheme. She received regular payments for information about children working in commercial establishments in the area. When he confronted the woman with the evidence, her reaction confirmed all his fears. "You don't understand the reality of the situation," she said coldly. "These children have no future anyway. At least this way they contribute to the local economy." "You're talking about child slavery," he retorted, struggling to control his fury. "I'm talking about pragmatism," she replied, and you're meddling in matters you don't understand." The threat was clear. The businessman realized that he had completely underestimated the extent and power of the network he was trying to combat. This was not just a matter of a cruel landlady exploiting some vulnerable children. It was an organized system with tentacles that extended into his own company. In the following week, the problems began to multiply exponentially. Suppliers cancelled contracts without explanation. Employees began to resign en masse, and malicious rumors about irregular practices in his restaurants began to circulate around the city. His business reputation, built over years of hard work and careful investments, was being systematically destroyed. Profits decreased drastically. His investments in stocks began to show significant losses, and banks that had once competed for his business suddenly became reluctant to approve new loans. "They're trying to break me financially," he realized, analyzing the devastating reports that arrived daily. "They want to force me to abandon the investigation." But the cruelest blow was yet to come. On Friday night, when the waif was preparing to return to the Fleabag Motel, she approached him with tears in her eyes. "The mean woman said that if I go back tomorrow, something very bad will happen to you," she whispered, holding his small hand with desperate strength. "She said that powerful people are angry because you're asking questions you shouldn't." The millionaire knelt before the child, looking deeply into her frightened eyes. "Do you want me to stop trying to help you?" "No," she replied immediately, her voice trembling but determined. "But I also don't want you to get hurt because of me." At that moment, observing the impressive courage of that 4-year-old waif who was more concerned with his well-being than with her own suffering, the businessman felt a renewed strength growing in his chest. No matter how many enemies he made, no matter how much money he lost in the process, he would find the waif's sister, destroy the exploitation network that had separated them, and give them both back the childhood they deserved, even if it cost him everything he had achieved in life. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment on what you thought of my story, giving it a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.